All right. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Today is going to be, we're going to do some fun. I'm just adjusting my sound here. I want to make sure I'm good. I want to make sure I'm on the right mic. Okay, good. I am on the right mic. Well, hey, welcome to Motivated Minds, everybody. I know that we've got some people that are doing some live streaming right now. Even as we speak, you'll probably be kind of connecting with some of the other teammates that we have. But today I want to bring you into something I think is going to be really, really amazing. So welcome to Motivated Minds. I hope tonight's topic is going to be really interesting and enjoyable for everybody. Okay, we're gonna break down the ego, and this is one of my favorites, by the way. But we're gonna break down specifically the toxic ego and the healthy ego, or what we call ego strength. Okay, so it's definitely one of my faves, especially, of course, because, I always personalize my streams. So like this one, I've struggled for years with a toxic ego, the toxic part of my ego. It's created huge issues for me, especially relationally. So some of you might be able to relate to this as we talk about it tonight. Hopefully you'll better understand after tonight's live stream a little bit more about these two different egos. Okay, so hang on, because this is going to be a lot of fun. So let's get into this. So there's a bunch of factors. And by the way, yes, if anybody is in here, subscribe, like, comment. I'll punch that up a few times during our show. But tonight, there are these two factors that I want to dig into that contribute to ego strength. Okay, genetics, obviously, that's one of them. Early childhood experiences, we know that that's a part of it as well, and also ongoing life experiences. Right, those are all a part of what creates this ego strength. So let me just spend a second on some of the deeper parts of our ego, like as a newborn. Right, and some of you might already know some of this. A newborn has no sense of self as an infant, right? When we were infants, we had no sense of self. So we lacked an ego. Basically, in the strictest sense, we lacked an ego. Why? Well, because that's what we needed as infants, right? We needed that in our development of survival during that time. It actually may have really helped us to feel a felt sense of oneness, with our mother, our primary caregiver, our attachment figures at that time, okay, which was, of course, again, vital for our development at that time, for our survival. It helped us move on, actually, to a personal sense of, that separation and that uniqueness, okay? But that's where it started. So this sense of self that we form as in our early childhood, growing up, in a particular culture and language, it's anchored by our ego strength and the social forces and things like that shape our group identity. So let me share one last thing. This is just a little bit of context before we jump into that good stuff. In the first years of our life, our encounters with primary caregivers had an impact, of course, on our ego, okay, and our ego strength, in ways that might have created this long-term influence. So as a young child's sense of self, especially when under stress, actually it's subconsciously wired or imprinted as learned neural patterns in our brain during interactions with our primary caretakers. Okay, so fortunately, this is the good part. When we look at our brain and how our brain is designed and hardwired, we're really fortunate because our brains are created with this thing that we call neuroplasticity. Okay, there's a lot of movement in our brains throughout our life. We can change. That's what that means. We have room to adapt and change throughout our life. And personally, I am a part of that change. I've experienced a lot of that change. I've gone through some really difficult toxic ego and fixed mindset, seeing black and white. And I've been able to adapt to a much more flexible and with a lot more ego strength. And so that's what we're going to get into, okay? So let's dive into our first slide so everybody... Here we go. So what is ego? Let's just start with that. What's ego? Ego is a Greek word for I, meaning the core sense of self. As you can see on the slide, a distinct and unique expression of personhood, one that paradoxically exists in connection or in relation to life and others. And basically what that means is there's a kind of a scale, right, that we're looking at here, and between this toxic ego or unhealthy ego and healthy ego or toxic or ego strength, okay, there's a scale. And hopefully we're moving toward the other part of the scale throughout our life, more towards the healthy ego, okay? Now, this is where we start kind of jumping into the deep end. So what is ego versus ego strength? Well, a person with little or weak ego strength, and again, I can tell you that was me in my young adult life. I had a real struggling weak ego, and I lacked resiliency, as it says here. I stuck mostly to what felt comfortable, and I had a really hard time being assertive when I needed to be. Now, on the other hand, as I've moved into a lot more healing and into more ego strength, people with strong ego strength, they're better able to withstand stressful situations. They adapt to change more easily. And of course, they're a lot more assertive when necessary. Does that make sense? So let's look at the toxic ego in action, okay? So that you can better understand what that unhealthy or toxic ego looks like when it's activated. I put it all here on the slide for you. Well, it lives in denial. That with somebody who struggles with an unhealthy or toxic ego, they live a lot in denial. They rationalize, they justify, and they normalize the need to comfort their greatest fears, to confront their greatest fears. You see? There is, by the way, all of those things, rationalizing, justifying, and normalizing, those are all under what we call the umbrella of denial. And a person living in that toxic ego is living in denial about the need to confront those issues. Also, somebody who's living in that toxic ego, they see strength. This is really, really important. They see strength in unhealthy strategies, such as mind reading. Do you ever meet somebody who says, you know what? I'm really grateful that I can tell what people are going to do. If you've ever watched Seinfeld, there was an episode many, many years ago where George Costanza, who struggled with toxic ego, came into the room and they all asked him what he was doing. And he said, I'm just coming in, from the beach, and, I'm really bummed out. And he was in his victimhood. And this is what he said. You know what? How did my life get here? Because he was so bummed out about his life. And then he said this, at least I know when somebody is uncomfortable at a party. Do you see that? That's not a strength. What he's saying is basically, I'm kind of triggered by other people's needs. That's what we would call a codependent trait right there. I always know when somebody's uncomfortable. I always know, and that triggers somebody into action. That means that we're not comfortable allowing other people to have their own feelings and emotions. The next one is relying on the ideal in order to feel secure, to feel heard, to feel accepted, to feel understood, to feel seen. Does you understand what living in the ideal, relying on the ideal? That means, dude, I'm only, today I have to be 100. And if I'm not 100 today, then I'm not secure, and I'm not accepted, and I'm not seen. I have to be 100 today because 100 is the ideal, right? So that's one of the ways that you see toxic ego in action. So let me go back here just for a second. Let me go here. I want to share a couple of things with you before we move on, okay? A little bit more about the unhealthy ego. So listen carefully. Sly, I know you're driving, so you're probably going to get this, as you're driving. A person who has a thin or really fragile ego is susceptible to stress, right? A person with a toxic ego, they avoid what doesn't feel good. They resist change. They're unwilling to take risks because they have little or no ego strength. Okay? They're rooted instead in fear and anxiety. And again, I'm speaking through experience. They tend to have unrealistically high expectations that are kept firmly in place by emotionally charged core beliefs that activate the body's stress response. See, their thinking patterns are out of whack. So what am I implying? It might indicate that the individual has certain limiting ideas and toxic thought patterns, such as believing they lack the resources or they're too weak or fragile to actually endure certain provocative events, such as conflict. Or it can also indicate that they rely on their anger and rage to get others to understand them, to appreciate them, to make them feel heard again and loved or accepted, understood, or seen. So they frequently attach themselves to others or seek out activities or substances sometimes when it gets really hard that they feel can provide them with this constant source of comfort. And also it would give them confidence, right? That they believe that they need or that they must have in order to feel good about themselves and their life. You may know some people like this, right? You see, when a person has these expectations that are based on false beliefs, false core beliefs that sabotage their best efforts to change and grow, this is interesting. Listen, they unnecessarily activate the body's stress response and reactivity. So unfortunately, the reality is that learning is impeded when the brain is in protective mode. Do you get that? Like when I'm in protective mode, I can't learn. I'm activated. I'm in a protective response, and I'm not allowing myself to basically be able to break down what it is that I'm going through, because the stress response activates what we call the sympathetic division, right, of the autonomic nervous system. What does that mean? Well, first of all, you have to understand that shuts off the brain's learning system, like I said. And, the clinical kind of term we use for that basically is a parasympathetic nervous or system, right? And I'm not going to go too deep into the clinical aspect of this, but this means this. The reflecting thinking parts, the parts in the brain that we use to reflect, they're not operating. So it's less likely, if not absolutely impossible, to consider healthy options and new possibilities. Does that make sense? Like I can't think of an option. Instead, I say, there is nothing else I can do. There is no other option. That's a weak ego strength. And by the way, when we talk about this ego strength, it's not all the way around. In some areas, like I was talking about that scale, we have healthier ego in some areas of our life, and we have weaker ego in some areas of our life. I can tell you that as a result, basically, of what I just said. Reactive responses not only prevent us from like forming this stronger ego or ego strength, but they also make us prone to repeating this stuff, repeating the problematic or destructive behavior patterns. So basically, people who have an underdeveloped, like I did for so many years, this underdeveloped ego strength, I lived and I behaved in defensive ways that were self-perpetuating. Okay, my capacity to deal with the daily challenges of life were severely limited. And so that's why, we go back to this again. Living in denial, rationalizing, justifying, normalizing the need to confront our greatest fears, seeing strength in unhealthy strategies, right? Like avoidance and rage and wishful thinking. Those aren't healthy strategies, but when we're in our toxic ego, we kind of think they are. And of course, we rely on the ideal. We rely on our feelings and our emotions more than anything else. Okay. So before we get into the the rest of this, I do just want to say real quick before we move on, a few people are in here. I know my great friend Obbs is in here. Aubrey's in here. I'll probably be popping in and out as I have stuff going on. I'm excited. Thank you for being here, Obbs. That's I'm always happy that you're here. So thanks for being here. Sly, welcome. Yes, she's driving, and of course, I love that show, that Frasier Crane. Frasier was awesome. I'm listening, so good. I hope you get something out of this. I really do. Yes, my man, Luis, Mr. Camera Junkie is here. And by the way, you had an amazing stream last night. That was incredible. It was worth every minute because it went long, but it was good. Jim is here. It's so cool, Jim. Thanks, man. I'm glad you made it tonight. So, and thank you, Luis, that you're keeping an eye on me, man, that it looks and sounds great, because I count on that. I don't have my earpieces in tonight, so I'm counting on it. So, Meg Jen, she says self-righteousness is ego. Yeah, it's part of the toxic ego, you know. It ties into that. It's under that umbrella, you know, and there's a lot of stuff underneath there. And, you know, I'm going to break it down just a little bit more, because that is one of those things. Basically, self-righteousness, it's fixed. It's more fixed. It's not very flexible. It judges, right? It judges it condemns others. And self-righteousness we can also be really hard on ourselves if we're in self-righteousness. We can beat ourselves up too, because we're holding everybody to such a high standard. It's most likely that we're holding ourselves to that same standard as well. So there might be like some shame going on behind the scenes, is what I'm saying. Okay. So let's get into this, what healthy looks like. So what does healthy ego look like in action? Okay. What is that? Before I get into that, let me just kind of get a little bit into the toxic ego. Let me lay a foundation for the healthy ego. Sorry. Okay, so the more secure this area is in our life, our ego strength, well, it makes sense, right? The more comfortable we are in accepting responsibility for everything, for our problems, and trusting that also to others, meaning it's easier for us to take ownership. In fact, this robust self-concept is linked to a resilient ego strength. You know, somebody with a healthier ego, they can actually look at a problem and they can see beyond it. You know, they can distinguish also, this is really important to understand, they can distinguish between needs and wants. Isn't that interesting? We confuse needs and wants all the time, by the way. And also somebody in healthier ego, they can accept what can't be changed rather than reacting impulsively, okay? So the strength, the strong ego, the healthy ego, the ego strength, this allows us to negotiate these difficult situations with more ease, with more resilience, because the healthier ego strength, it provides us with what we need basically in the tank to be able to face these things. And you know what? It's a key skill, right? It's something that like I said, I wasn't born with a healthy ego strength. That's something that I had to really learn in my young adult life. And by the way, I'm still learning. But it really is a key skill in development of healthy emotional intimacy as well among couples. I work with couples all the time. And what we're working on developing is a healthier ego strength when I'm working with these couples. See, with someone who's growing or has a healthier ego, they're less inclined to personalize what others say and do. Can you relate to that? See, if my ego was stronger, I wouldn't be bothered so much by what someone else might say or do, but I am. I also know people who are less bothered by that. That means they have a healthier ego strength than I do. Also, they're more ready to accept themselves and others as just human beings, you know, who have rights to make mistakes, who can develop their own problem-solving skills, and also they can learn from them, okay? The last thing I want you to understand about the healthy ego is that a person who has a well-developed ego they're resilient. They're resilient. They're confident. They have a strong belief in their abilities, actually, and in those abilities to actually overcome difficulties. Okay, so let's then look at what the healthy ego looks like in action. So as you can see on the slide, somebody living in a healthier ego, they have growth, or they have a flexible mindset that allows them to learn from life's difficult circumstances. See, when we're in the fixed mindset, we're not, remember I told you a little while ago, that area of learning is impeded, and we're not learning from our difficult circumstances like we can when we have a healthier ego. Also, a person who is growing or has a healthier ego, they adopt healthier thinking habits. They don't tend to personalize or catastrophize or adopt black and white thinking. Can you hear the flexibility here? And again, there's hope. If you can identify with some of this from some of the toxic ego or unhealthy ego, there's hope, because our brains can make some serious changes. Also, a person in it with a healthier ego, they can see life through the lens of curiosity, and they can welcome challenging situations that they know will only help them grow and change. Isn't that awesome? And, I do this sometimes. Sometimes it's harder to do this. Sometimes it's easier to do this. My healthy ego is still growing, and sometimes I still fall back into some of that unhealthy ego. But that's the of change. So ego strength is this. This is ego strength. It's self-mastery to make ideal decisions at any one moment in time. Ego strength is fostering resilience and a capacity to manage difficult feelings in order to stay in a more regulated emotional state. Also, the third one here I put here for you, the ability to accept what is right now. What is right now, whether it's in the past or it's present, and to withstand stress, tension, and annoyance, and this is the important thing about that, without being triggered. See, ego strength is a measure of all of those things. What you need to understand, the difference between triggered and bothered or irritated or annoyed, those are different things. Triggered is something really deep and powerful is coming up. People with trauma will experience being triggered when their trauma is activated, right? But we don't want to be triggered. Being irritated, bothered, annoyed, that's okay. We can handle that. We have more resilience in that. But triggered? We don't have to be triggered, right? We don't have to go there. I want to remind you of this, okay? We're getting to the end of our stream here. I wanted to make this a little quicker tonight because there's a lot of information I want you to try and inhale. The reminder, every week I'm going to be reminding everyone about this on the stream. So, reaching out to others for the benefit of fact-checking. Remember I talked about this last week? Fact-checking. We need others to help us fact-check what we're thinking or what we're feeling. What happens if I feel alone right now? It's very likely I'm not. So, who can help me fact-check? Somebody else, reaching out to a friend, a close friend, a deep and meaningful friend who I trust, who I can process with, actually can help me fact check. Practice slowing down this coming week. The reason I do these on Sundays is because I want to get you started off on the week in a good way. So practice slowing down this week and giving your body, your mind, a time of rest so that they can be more optimized. Be more willing to do things differently than you've done before. Do a George Costanza. That episode was actually called Opposite George. Let's do that. Accept the reality of now and allow yourself to experience discomfort and move through it. The dust is going to settle, I promise. And also, I want to challenge you to live in radical acceptance of your real self today and stop judging yourself with expectations of living in your ideal self all the time. The fact is, we can't live 100 all the time. That's impossible. We just can't do it. Does that make sense? Hopefully some of that is making sense for you. Jim, no, you mentioned something here. So ego strength is keeping the toxic ego in check. Yes, it is, right? It's we don't have to be at the mercy of our unhealthy parts or unhealthy ego, our negative thoughts, our fearful thoughts, we don't have to be at the mercy of those. But when we feel them, doesn't it seem like we're at the mercy of them in the moment? It does sometimes, doesn't it? That's part of the unhealthy ego, right? Part of the unhealthy ego is there's nothing I could do. You guys remember when I was a kid, I used to love the Rocky movies. They were amazing. I loved them. They got me through a lot. So Rocky 4 was on, and I remember watching it. And here's the thing I remember about that movie. Remember when Rocky had promised Adrian, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm actually not going to fight. I promise Adrian. And Adrian felt good about that. But then Drago kills Rocky's partner. Remember that? So Rocky decides, I have to now. It's us against Russia. I have to do it now. It's kind of interesting about where we're at today, isn't it? So he decides to go on a press conference without even telling Adrian, and he decides to fight Drago. He comes home. Do you remember what happens when he comes home? As soon as he opens that door, he sees Adrian at the top of the stairs looking down at him with such disappointment. And she starts to tell him why. Why did you do this? She asks him why. And in that moment, he says this, it's who you married, Adrian. I'm a fighter. That's who I am. The fact is, that's not accurate. See, Rocky felt like there was no other option because he was overwhelmed by his friend's death. Apollo meant everything to him. Remember, Apollo helped him get through that last fight with Mr. T, right, with Clubber Lang. So he actually thought in that overwhelmed state, there is no option. I have to fight. The reality was he didn't have to. Okay, but he didn't think. He didn't think. He wasn't able to think. He wasn't able to process because he was so upregulated, right? And that was one of the main issues why he couldn't. So, and by the way, Mr. Camera Junkie, Rocky 4 was my absolute favorite. It was so good, wasn't it? It's amazing. I loved it, man. I mean, every single one of those movies. I'm just telling you. Rocky 5, maybe, I don't know. But they were all amazing, especially even Balboa. Wasn't that amazing too? So you guys, are you getting it? Are you connecting with this stuff? Are you kind of seeing how, there are these two parts of us. Which one are you listening to today? Can we take inventory? We can do that, at the end of our day. We can what? Who did I listen to more today? Did I listen to more of my unhealthy parts or my unhealthy ego or toxic ego? Maybe that came out today. Maybe it just kicked my butt all over the place. I totally gave in to all of that. Well, there's hope because we can do it different tomorrow. Or maybe at the end of the day, you take inventory and you're like, man, I really, really listened a lot today to that healthy ego. I learned from I practiced flexibility. I was flexible. I was faced with some things where I wanted to have some black and white thinking. I was faced with some things where I just didn't want to do it differently than I've done before. But instead, I practiced being flexible. I did opposite George. Because my strategy hasn't worked so well, I chose to do something different. And tonight, at the end of this day, I can say that I've grown some today. I've grown more in my healthy ego, right? That's what we can do. That's how we can use this. So remember, together we can really grow in these areas, right? We can really grow in the healthy ego. And I think a lot of that is happening even in our group. Some of us are a part of some communities where there's a lot of encouragement going on. And we're learning how to live more in that healthy ego. We tell somebody something like, I could have done that better. And somebody says, you're kind of being hard on yourself, aren't you? Well, listen to that because you probably are, and so we can receive it. Here's something that I want you to kind of get before we sign off. Okay. First, I just want to say thanks for hitting that like button, you guys. I see you guys are hitting that and I appreciate it. I want to say thank you for plugging into tonight's meeting, okay? Mr. Camera Junkie said it last night, and I'll say the same thing. It means a lot. It means a lot to me, but I hope it not only makes sense to you, I also hope that it's revealing something to you about your own limiting beliefs. Those beliefs that tend to get in the way of your best efforts to grow and change. That's my greatest hope, whether you are hearing this now or you watch it on the replay. One of the best ways to move forward is really to take some time to examine our beliefs and what might be holding us back. A lot of these limiting beliefs, they're based on fear, and fear of failure, for instance, fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of uncertainty. It's big. But if we can identify these fears and if we can work through them instead of avoid them, it can make a big difference in our ability to move forward in the biggest ways in our life. In addition, I want you to understand it's important to take action toward our goals. How many times do we hear that? Taking action toward our goals. Just thinking about it, just thinking about what we want to do, what we want to achieve, it's not enough. We need to take concrete steps toward making it happen, right? This may mean starting small, okay? That's okay, but even small steps can lead to big changes over time. Finally, I want you to remember that change is a process, okay? It rarely happens overnight. So be patient with yourself. Don't be too discouraged. Try not to be too discouraged if you don't see results immediately. Change takes time. Learning how to grow in our healthy ego takes time, but it is possible if we're willing to put in the effort. So I hope this has been super helpful for everyone tonight. Thanks again for plugging into the stream. If you would, I think, Luis, you did this too, and it's really helpful. If you have any ideas or something that you'd like me to break down, put that in the comment section, and I'll jump on that and break that down in a way that might be kind of going behind the scenes with it, pulling back the curtain, whether it's procrastination or some kind of fear or something, whatever it is. Feel free to put that in the comments, and I'll work on breaking that down and creating a presentation out of it. But I really do appreciate it, like I said, you guys. And, as we move forward, I want to let you know I'm going to keep being on tonight. Tonight is Sunday night, Psychoeducational Sundays. Okay, this is what I'm doing. Mr. Camera Junkie, an idea with no action is just a dream. That's right. Just a dream. You remember daydreaming? I don't know if you ever daydream when you were a little kid, or sometimes I even daydream now. But the difference is if we get stuck there, right? Fantasy is nothing wrong with fantasy, but if we get locked into it, if we get stuck in it with no action, then it's what Luis says. We're just dreaming, and we don't want to get stuck in dreaming, right? There are some amazing dreamers out there, but they get things done and they create amazing things. So let's create amazing things together, okay? So thank you again for plugging in, you guys. It was fun to be able to present this to you tonight. This is one that's really near and dear to my heart. Let's grow in that healthy ego. Let's learn to identify and kind of strangle the toxic ego more and more. But let's be fact checkers together, right? Let's do that. So until next week, we'll see you then. Hold steady, everybody. Have a great week.